Some of the worst scandals in history never made it into the books. A man invented a country that never existed and sold it to families. A king owned a country like a house and cut the hands off children who did not bring back enough rubber. A president stole billions from his own people in the name of gold that was never in the ground. 27 scandals, all buried. Some almost worked. Today, we dug them back up. 1. Britain, 1720. There was a company that promised gold from the other side of the world. It was called the South Sea Company. It had permission from the British government to trade with South America. Everyone believed there were mountains of silver waiting there, rivers of gold, a fortune for anyone brave enough to buy in. The truth was smaller. The company barely traded at all. Spain controlled those waters, and Spain was not letting British ships through. But the story was better than the truth. Members of Parliament were quietly given free shares. So were people close to the king. Once the powerful were on board, the newspapers filled with promises. The price of a single share climbed higher and higher and higher. Ordinary people rushed in. Shopkeepers, widows, priests, servants. They sold their homes to buy shares. They borrowed money from friends. They believed they were about to be rich. Even Isaac Newton, the smartest man in England, put his savings in. He later said he could calculate the movement of the stars, but not the madness of men. Then the bubble popped. In a few weeks, the shares were worth almost nothing. Families lost everything. Some men shot themselves. Newton lost the equivalent of millions in today's money. The politicians who had been given free shares, most of them kept their jobs. A few were quietly asked to step down. The company was rescued. The small people were not. It was the first time the modern world learned a lesson it keeps forgetting. The people who build the bubble almost never lose when it breaks. 2. The American government was doing two things it had promised never to do. The first thing was selling weapons to Iran. Iran was an enemy country. The law said no American could sell them a single bullet. But somewhere in the White House, a small group of men decided the law did not apply to them. The second thing was funding a rebel army in a small country called Nicaragua. Congress had voted no. The rebels were killing farmers and burning villages. The American people did not want to pay for it. So the men in the White House found a trick. They sold the weapons to Iran in secret. They took the money from those sales. And they sent that money, quietly, through banks in other countries, to the rebels in Nicaragua. 2 crimes, 1 line of cash. Nobody in Congress knew. The man running it was a young officer named Oliver North. He worked out of a basement office. He shredded documents by the box. When the story finally broke, he stood in front of Congress in his uniform and said he had done it for his country. The president, Ronald Reagan, went on television. He said he did not know. He said if it happened, he had not been told. Most Americans wanted to believe him, so they did. A few small men were punished. A few were pardoned later. Reagan finished his term as a hero. The farmers in Nicaragua kept dying. Nobody in Washington ever counted them. 3. France, 1785. There was a necklace so expensive, no queen would buy it. 647 diamonds, made for the mistress of an old king who died before he could pay for it. The jewelers were desperate to sell. They kept begging Queen Marie Antoinette to take it. She said no, twice. Then a con woman heard about the necklace. Her name was Jean. She was poor, clever, and full of anger at the palace. She found a cardinal, a powerful man who badly wanted the queen to like him. And she told him a lie. She said the queen secretly wanted the necklace. She said the queen was too proud to ask for it herself. She said if he bought it in her name, the queen would love him for it. The cardinal believed her. He bought the necklace. He handed it to Jean, thinking she was taking it to the queen. Jean broke it apart the same night. The diamonds were sold, one by one, on the streets of London. When the jewelers came asking for their money, the truth came out. The queen had never wanted the necklace. She had never met Jean. She had done nothing wrong. But the people of France did not believe her. They already thought the queen was greedy. This story fit what they wanted to believe. The palace tried to explain. No one listened. 4 years later, the same people came for the palace with knives. And when they killed the queen, some of them still called her the woman who stole the necklace. 4. Rome, 1492. A Spanish cardinal wanted to become pope. His name was Rodrigo Borgia. He had money, children, and a reputation the church did not want people to talk about. But he had one more thing. He was ready to buy the most powerful seat in the church. The cardinals who chose the Pope were supposed to be holy men. They were supposed to pray and choose the man closest to God. But Rodrigo sent them gold, silver, and promises of power. One cardinal was reportedly paid in 4 mule loads of silver, delivered to his door the night before the vote. The next morning, he was Pope. He took the name Alexander VI. He moved into the Vatican with his mistress. His children came to live nearby. His son killed rivals in the streets of Rome and was never touched. His daughter was married off 3 times to build his power, and when his enemies died, they died suddenly, often after drinking wine at his table. Rome had a name for it. They called it the Borgia Cup. He ruled the church for 11 years. He died in his bed, still Pope, still rich, still holding the keys to heaven. For hundreds of years, the church kept the worst of it buried. He was one of the most powerful men in the world, and he had bought the job. 5. There was a bank that worked for the worst people in the world. Its full name was the Bank of Credit and Commerce International. Most people called it BCCI. It had offices in 78 countries. It looked like a normal bank. Millions of ordinary people kept their savings there. But behind the counters, another business was running. BCCI moved money for drug lords. It moved money for arms dealers. It hid the fortunes of dictators who had stolen from their own people. It carried cash for spy agencies that did not want their governments to know. Every time a country's police got close, another government would quietly ask them to back off. Too many powerful people were using the bank. Nobody wanted the whole tower to fall. But it did fall. In 1991, regulators in several countries acted at the same time. The doors were shut. The accounts were frozen. $20 billion was missing. The people who ran BCCI got some jail time, but not much. The dictators kept the money that had already been moved. The drug lords found new banks. And the ordinary people, the ones who had trusted BCCI with their small savings, in Pakistan, in Britain, in the Gulf, in Africa, most of them never got their money back. 6. Sweden, 1932. One man controlled almost every match in the world. His name was Ivar Kruger. He was a quiet Swede with cold eyes and a soft voice. Beginning in the 1920s, he built a business empire on something small, the wooden match used by every family every day to light a stove or a cigarette. He bought match factories in country after country. He loaned money to whole governments, and in exchange, they gave him control of their entire match market. By the end, he had lit fires in almost every home on Earth. He was called the Match King. Presidents visited him. Newspapers called him a genius. But inside his offices, the numbers were fake. The empire was built on loans, and the loans were paid back with more loans. When those ran out, he forged documents. He invented Italian government bonds that did not exist. He signed the papers himself, alone in his room at night. For years, nobody noticed. Nobody wanted to. When the Great Depression finally hit, the tower cracked. Investigators arrived at his Paris apartment for a meeting. They found him in his bed. He had shot himself through the heart. The forged papers were on the desk beside him. Millions of ordinary people, in dozens of countries, lost their savings. That was our first 6. But coming up, a king who did not just rule a country. He owned one. And what he did to the people who lived there, most books still do not have the room to tell you. Number 7. 7. France, 1307. On a Friday morning in October, soldiers came at dawn. Across the country of France, in every city where the Knights Templar had a house, the doors were kicked in. Men were dragged from their beds. By sunrise, thousands of them were in chains. The Knights Templar were the most respected soldiers in the Christian world. For 200 years they had fought in holy wars. They had built castles. They had opened banks. Kings borrowed money from them. Popes protected them. They were rich, and they were untouchable. Or so they thought. The King of France was named Philip. He was deep in debt. He owed the Templars more than he could ever pay back. And he had a simple idea. If the Templars were criminals, he would not have to pay. So he made them criminals. His men accused the knights of denying God, of spitting on the cross, of secret sins. The charges were invented. Philip's own advisors admitted it in private. But the knights were tortured until they confessed. Whatever the torturers asked, they said yes. Some died in the cells. Some were burned alive in Paris, still shouting that they were innocent. The Pope, who was supposed to protect them, was afraid of Philip. He let it happen. The order was destroyed. The gold went to the king. And Philip's debt, the debt that had started the whole thing, was wiped clean. 8. Europe, early 1500s. The Church was selling forgiveness of sin. For hundreds of years, the Catholic Church had taught that a sinner had to confess, pray, and change their ways to be forgiven. Then, quietly, another way appeared. If you paid the Church a fee, it would forgive part of your punishment, or your dead mother's punishment, or a sin you had not yet even committed. It was called an indulgence, and it worked like a receipt from God. By the year 1500, the sale was massive. Preachers traveled from town to town with printed forms, blanks left for the name of the buyer. Cheap indulgences for poor peasants, expensive ones for rich merchants. The money went to Rome, where it was building the biggest church in the world, St. Peter's Basilica. One preacher had a rhyme. He told crowds, as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. In a small German town, a monk named Martin Luther heard about it and became furious. He wrote a list of complaints and nailed it to a church door. That list broke Christianity in half. The Protestant Reformation had begun. Popes had turned forgiveness into a business, and in the end, the business cost them half of Europe. 9. Britain, 1889. Police raided a small house in London and uncovered a secret that reached the royal family. The house was on Cleveland Street. It was a brothel. The workers inside were teenage boys, some as young as 15. Most were poor. Some worked normal day jobs delivering telegrams and came to the house at night to earn extra money. The customers were another world: wealthy men, aristocrats, members of parliament, officers in the army, and, the rumors said, a member of the royal family himself, the grandson of the Queen, second in line to the throne. When the police took their statements, the boys were arrested and jailed. Some were only children. The powerful men were not. Word came down quietly from above: do not touch them. One aristocrat was allowed to flee the country before charges could be filed. The rumored royal name was never officially spoken. Newspapers that tried to print it were threatened, sued, and shut down. A journalist who kept digging was sentenced to a year in prison, not for lying, but for printing the truth without enough legal cover. The boys served their time, the powerful men served none, and the name of the royal, whether true or not, was buried so deep that even today, historians only whisper it. 10. A banker was found hanging under a bridge in London. His name was Roberto Calvi. His pockets were full of bricks. His shoes were wet. The police said suicide. Nobody believed them. Calvi had run one of Italy's biggest banks. His nickname was God's Banker. That was because his main partner was not another bank. It was the Vatican, the bank of the Catholic Church. Together they had been moving money quietly around the world. Some of it belonged to the church. Some of it belonged to the Italian mafia. Some of it belonged to a secret group of powerful men who wanted to control the country from the shadows. When the bank started to fall apart, more than $1 billion was missing. The Vatican said it knew nothing. The mafia said nothing. The secret group disappeared into the walls. And Calvi, the one man who could have named everyone, was found dead in London 10 days after he ran from Rome. Later investigators said it was murder. His body had been hung so someone else could send a message. In the underworld, bricks in the pockets meant one thing: he had talked too much. The Vatican quietly paid part of the missing money back. It never explained where the rest went. 11. France, 1894. A note was found in a wastebasket at the German embassy. It said someone in the French army was selling secrets. The army needed a name, fast. They picked a captain named Alfred Dreyfus. He was a good officer. He had done nothing wrong. But he was Jewish, and in France at that time, that was enough. They put him in front of a court. They showed letters as proof. The letters were fake. The army knew they were fake. He was sent to a small island near South America, alone, in chains. His wife was told he might never come back. Years passed, and then a new officer looked at the file. He saw the truth. The letters had been written by another man, a man still working in the French army. He told his bosses, they didn't free Dreyfus, they hid the truth. They sent the new officer far away, to keep him quiet, because to admit the mistake would mean admitting the army had been wrong. It took 12 years for France to say the words out loud. 12 years of an innocent man in a cage. By the time he came home, his hair was white, his health was broken, his daughter had grown up without him. The men who had lied about him were never punished. 12. There was a woman in the Philippines with 3,000 pairs of shoes. Her name was Imelda Marcos. Her husband Ferdinand was the president of the Philippines. Together they ruled the country for 21 years. The Philippines was not a rich country. Children went to school without shoes on their feet. Many farmers went to sleep hungry. While ordinary people struggled, life inside the presidential palace looked completely different. Gold, paintings from Europe, jewels kept in shoeboxes, bank accounts in Switzerland under names that were not their own. By the end, they had taken an estimated $10 billion from their own people. When anyone spoke against them, they had a system. Journalists disappeared. Students were arrested at night. A young senator, who could have challenged Ferdinand Marcos, was shot dead on an airport runway the moment he stepped off the plane. The Marcoses said they knew nothing. In 1986, the people finally poured into the streets, millions of them. Peaceful, but too many to stop. Ferdinand and Imelda were flown out of the country in a hurry. They left so fast, they left the shoes behind. When the new government walked into the palace, the shoes were still there. Row after row, more than one woman could ever wear in a lifetime. Most of the $10 billion was never found. Some of it, the family still has today. 13. A small Canadian company said it had found the biggest gold deposit on Earth. The company was Brex. It had a claim deep in the jungle of Borneo, in Indonesia. Their geologist came back with samples full of gold. Then more samples. Then more. The estimates kept growing. 50 million ounces. 70. 200. If it was real, it would be one of the richest discoveries in human history. The stock price exploded. Ordinary Canadians poured in their savings. Teachers, firefighters, nurses. Some borrowed money against their houses to buy more shares. The founder of Brex went from a nobody to one of the richest men in Canada. Then a bigger mining company came to check the samples for themselves. There was no gold. The samples had been salted. Somebody had been shaving gold from cheap jewelry, even from wedding rings, and mixing it into the rocks. Every test the company had ever run was a lie. The stock collapsed in a single afternoon. $6 billion vanished. Families lost everything. The chief geologist, the one man who could have named who was behind it, was flying over the jungle in a helicopter when the door opened. He fell more than 800 feet into the trees below. The official report said suicide. Nobody in Borneo believed it. 14. Iran, 1953. A country wanted to own its own oil. The country was Iran. For years, the oil under its ground had belonged to a British company. The British paid Iran very little. They kept most of the money for themselves. The Iranian people were angry. They elected a leader who promised to change that. His name was Mohammad Mossadegh. He was old, quiet, and honest. He told the British company the oil now belonged to Iran. The British were furious, but they could not do it alone, so they went to the Americans. Together they made a plan. Not a war, something quieter. American spies would go into Iran with suitcases of cash. They would pay newspapers to print lies about Mossadegh. They would pay men in the streets to riot in his name, then riot against him. They would pay the army to turn. It worked in 3 days. Mossadegh was arrested in his own home. He spent the rest of his life under house arrest and died alone. A king was put back in his place, one who would keep the oil flowing to the west. For 26 years, that king ruled Iran with a secret police famous for its cruelty. Then, in 1979, the Iranian people rose up and threw him out. What came next was worse for everyone. America and Britain denied the whole thing for 50 years. When the papers were finally released, they admitted it, quietly on a Tuesday afternoon. We are halfway through. 14 buried scandals, kings, banks, popes, and armies. And somehow, the story gets stranger from here. Coming up, a pope who dug his dead enemy out of the ground and put the corpse on trial. And near the end, a man who invented a country that never existed and sold it to hundreds of families who sailed off to find it. 15. Rome, 897. A pope put a dead pope on trial. The dead man had been Pope Formosus. He had been buried 9 months earlier. His body was rotting quietly in his tomb. The new pope was Stephen VI. He hated Formosus. He hated him so much that being dead was not enough. So he had the body dug up. They pulled the corpse from the grave. They dressed the rotting body in papal robes. They placed the crown on the skull. They carried it into a courtroom and sat it in a chair. They put a young priest behind the body to answer for it. Then Stephen began to shout. He accused the dead pope of crimes. He asked the corpse questions. When the corpse, of course, said nothing, the young priest gave answers in a small voice, saying whatever he was told to say. The court found the dead man guilty. They stripped the body of its robes. They cut off the 3 fingers he had used to bless people during his lifetime. They dragged the corpse through the streets of Rome, and they threw it into the river Tiber. The people of Rome had watched all of it. A few months later, they rose up against Stephen. He was thrown in prison. He was strangled in his cell. The church tried, for centuries, to quietly forget the whole thing had ever happened. 16. France, 1677. Paris had a problem. Rich people were dying, and nobody knew why. At first it looked like bad luck. A husband died. A rival at court died. An inconvenient uncle died. But the deaths kept coming, always in the same houses, always at useful times. When the police looked closer, they found a whole hidden business under the city. Women who sold poison to ladies of the court. Priests who held dark ceremonies for money. Fortune tellers who promised the death of any enemy for the right price. The most famous was a woman called Lavoisin. She had customers from the highest families in France. Some came for love potions, some came to kill a husband. The king who ruled France was Louis XIV, the Sun King. He ordered a full investigation. Then the investigators found a name that stopped them cold. His own favorite mistress. She had been buying potions from Lavoisin. She had, some said, taken part in the ceremonies. Under the black masses, over the body of a naked woman, the priests had said her name. The king shut the investigation down. Lavoisin was burned in public. The smaller people were punished. The records that pointed to the palace were locked away. Some of them, the king ordered burned in front of him, so nothing would remain. 17. England, 1483. 2 boys were sent to the Tower of London and never came out. The older boy was 12. His name was Edward. He was supposed to be the next king of England. His father had just died, and the crown was his. The younger boy was 9. His name was Richard. He was the little brother. Their uncle, also called Richard, was made their protector. He was supposed to keep them safe until the older boy could be crowned. Instead, he moved them to the Tower of London. He said it was for their safety. Then he took the throne for himself. He said the boys were not the real children of the old king, and therefore could not rule. For a few weeks, the boys were still seen playing in the Tower gardens. Then they were seen only from windows. Then they were not seen at all. Nobody has ever found their bodies with certainty. Nobody has ever admitted what happened. 200 years later, workmen found the bones of 2 children buried under a staircase inside the tower. Nobody could prove they were the princes. Nobody could prove they were not. Their uncle ruled for 2 years before he was killed in battle. He never spoke of them. 18. South America, 1970s. 6 governments made a secret deal to hunt their own citizens across borders. The countries were Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, and Brazil. All of them were ruled by generals. All of them were afraid of their own people, of students, of writers, of anyone who spoke against them. Together they made an arrangement. If someone ran from one country to escape arrest, the next country would catch them, torture them, send them back, or make them disappear entirely. They called it Operation Condor. Tens of thousands of people vanished. Young mothers were taken from their homes. Their babies were given to military families and raised under new names. Some of those children only learned the truth as adults. Pregnant women were kept alive just long enough to give birth. Then they were drugged and thrown from airplanes into the ocean. It was called the death flights. For years, the governments denied any of it happened. The families of the missing were told they had run away, or gone crazy, or never existed. Then in 1992, in a small building in Paraguay, a lawyer stumbled into a warehouse full of files. Millions of pages, names, dates, photos. The generals had kept their own records of every person they had erased. The papers went to court. Slowly, very slowly, a few of the generals were arrested. Some died before they saw a courtroom. A few were sentenced late in life and spent their last years in prison. And the stolen children, the ones raised by military families, some are still being found today. Grown adults, with gray in their hair, meeting their real grandmothers for the first time. 19. The men building America's greatest railroad were quietly robbing the country that paid for it. The railroad was the transcontinental line. the one that finally connected the East and the West of the United States. It was one of the biggest projects in American history. The government sent huge amounts of money to help build it. The men in charge did something clever. They created a second, smaller company called Crédit Mobilier. Then they hired that company, themselves, to do the construction work. They charged the railroad 2 or 3 times what the work actually cost. The extra money went into their own pockets. They knew the government might notice. So they handed out shares in Crédit Mobilier to members of Congress. Free shares. The congressmen made money as long as they asked no questions. And they asked no questions. When a newspaper finally broke the story, more than a dozen powerful politicians were named, including a future president. Almost none of them were punished. A few were quietly asked to step down. Most stayed in office. The Transcontinental Railroad still stands. It was built with the money of ordinary Americans, and part of that money was stolen before a single track was laid. 20. France, 1750s. The King of France had a secret house for young girls. The king was Louis XV. His palace at Versailles was one of the grandest in the world. But not far from it, in a quiet part of town, he kept another house. A small one, hidden behind a plain garden wall. The house was called the Deer Park. Inside, a rotating group of very young women were kept, some barely more than children. They were brought there by trusted men who worked for the king. They were told a rich nobleman wanted their company. Most were not told the nobleman was the king himself. They came from poor families. Some were paid, some were promised husbands when they were sent away. Some were simply never seen again. The king grew tired of them quickly. When one was sent away, another arrived. The kingdom knew, in whispers. Officials looked the other way. The court quietly paid the bills. The church, which was supposed to guard the morals of the throne, said nothing. Louis XV was never punished for any of it. He died in his own bed of smallpox, wearing his crown to the end, and was buried in the great cathedral of the French kings. But the whispers did not die with him. They were passed down. The country his grandson inherited was already sick of its kings. And when the revolution came, and the crowd screamed for the throne to fall, some of the anger they carried belonged to the girls of the Deer Park. Girls whose names, even now, most of France has never bothered to learn. 21. Britain, 1995. One young man broke a 200-year-old bank. His name was Nick Leeson. He was 28. He worked for Barings Bank in an office in Singapore, buying and selling contracts on the market. Barings was one of the oldest banks in the world. It had loaned money to kings. It had helped America buy Louisiana from France. Nick was supposed to make small, safe bets. Instead, he made big ones. At first, he won. His bosses in London loved him. They stopped asking questions. He was making them so much money they did not want to know how. Then he started losing. Instead of telling his bosses, he opened a secret account. He hid the losses inside it. When he lost more, he doubled the next bet, hoping to win it back. He kept doubling. The hole kept growing. Nobody at head office noticed. The same young man who made the trades was also the one checking the trades. He signed off on his own crimes. By early 1995, he had lost more than $1 billion, more money than the entire bank was worth. He left a note that said, "I'm sorry." Then he ran. He was caught in Germany a few days later. Barings Bank, 233 years old, was sold for £1. 22. Papal States, 1858. Police came to a Jewish family's door and took their 6-year-old son. The family was the Mortaris. They lived in the city of Bologna, in the part of Italy ruled by the Pope. Their little boy was named Edgardo. A Christian servant girl had once worked in their house. Years earlier, when Edgardo was a baby and sick, she had secretly poured water on his head and said a Christian prayer. She thought she was saving his soul. Under the law of the Pope, that made him a Christian, and under the same law, a Christian child could not be raised by a Jewish family. So the police came, the mother screamed, the father begged, the neighbors stood in the street and watched. The boy was carried into a carriage and taken to Rome to be raised by the church. His parents traveled for years, asking anyone who would listen. Kings wrote letters. Newspapers around the world called it cruelty. The Pope refused to give him back. Edgardo grew up in the church. He became a priest. As an old man, he said he loved the church that had taken him. His mother had died still crying for her son. 23. France, 1892. A French company promised to cut a canal through Central America. It killed thousands of workers and stole from 1 million investors instead. The company was led by an old hero named Ferdinand de Lesseps, who had already built the Suez Canal. France trusted him. Everyone believed the Panama Canal would be his second great victory. But the jungle of Panama was not the desert of Egypt. Yellow fever came for the workers. Mud slid down the hills every time it rained. The equipment broke. The engineers gave up. More than 20,000 men died before a single ship ever passed through. The company was going bankrupt. And instead of telling the truth, its leaders paid people to hide it. They paid newspapers to write good stories. They paid politicians in the French parliament to keep quiet. They paid officials to approve new loans that they knew would never be paid back. Around 100 members of parliament took the money. When the truth broke, 1 million small investors, bakers, teachers, farmers, lost their savings. Some killed themselves. Most were never repaid. A few officials went to prison. Most of the politicians who took bribes kept their seats. 24. Belgium and the Congo, 1885 to 1908. A king owned a country. Not ruled it, not colonized it, owned it, like a piece of land, like a house. The king was Leopold II of Belgium. The country was the Congo, in the heart of Africa, a place bigger than most of Europe. Leopold had convinced the world he wanted to bring schools and hospitals to its people. Nobody checked. What he really wanted was rubber and ivory and whatever else the ground could give him. He sent officers into the villages with orders. Every village had to bring in a quota of rubber every month. If they did not bring enough, there were punishments. The punishments were kept quiet for a long time. If a man did not meet his quota, soldiers cut off his hand. If a village fell behind, they cut off the hands of the women and children. Bosses were required to bring baskets of hands back to prove they had done their duty. Whole villages were burned. Whole regions emptied. Families ran into the forest and starved rather than come back to work. By the time the truth reached Europe, an estimated 10 million Congolese had died. Some estimates go higher. Nobody knows for sure. Nobody wrote most of the names down. Leopold never went to Africa. He never saw the Congo with his own eyes. When international pressure finally forced him to hand the colony over to the Belgian government, he burned the records first, truckloads of paper. He said, quietly, that the Congo was his, and he did not want anyone knowing what he had done in it. He died in his palace, rich, respected, buried with honors. 25. United States, 1972. 5 men broke into an office one night. They had cash in their pockets. They had tools to listen in on private phone calls. And one of them had a phone number written on a piece of paper. A phone number that would end a president. The president was Richard Nixon. He was going to win the next election, easily. He did not need to cheat. But his people sent the 5 men anyway. To spy on the other party. To steal their letters. To hear every plan. They got caught. That should have been the end of it. It was only the start. Nixon paid the men to stay quiet. He used the country's spy agency to block the police. His closest people lied in court. And when the wife of one of his most powerful friends, a woman named Martha Mitchell, tried to tell reporters what she knew, they held her down in a hotel room and gave her a shot to keep her silent. She was called crazy. She died alone. Most people never learned her name. But Nixon had made one small mistake. He had recorded almost every conversation, every plan, every threat, every lie, on tape, in his own voice. When the tapes came out, the country heard the truth from the president's own mouth. He quit. He is the only US president in history who has ever had to. The real damage was quieter. Millions of people stopped trusting their government that year, and a lot of them never fully trusted it again. 26. In 1964, the president told the country an American ship had been attacked, twice. The ship was in the Gulf of Tonkin, off the coast of Vietnam. The first attack was real, small, brief, and over quickly. The second attack, 2 nights later, was the one that changed everything. The sailors that night were nervous. The weather was bad. The radar was showing shapes that were not really there. Reports came in of enemy boats firing. Then reports came in that maybe there were no boats. Then more reports. Then silence. Nobody was sure what had happened. The president was Lyndon Johnson. He did not wait to find out. Within hours, he was on television, telling America the enemy had attacked twice. Congress voted almost immediately to give him the power to go to war. 58,000 Americans would die in Vietnam. More than 1 million Vietnamese. Villages burned, whole families gone. Years later, the tapes came out. Johnson himself, on the phone, admitting he was not sure the second attack had ever happened. His own defense secretary said the same. The men who had launched the war had known, from almost the beginning, that the reason for it might not have been real. They kept sending soldiers anyway. 27. Britain, 1820s, a man invented a country. Not a small lie, not a made-up island for a joke. A whole country. With a name, Poyais. With a flag. With mountains, rivers, farmland, and gold in its streams. With a government and a capital city in Central America where ships could dock. None of it was real. The man was a Scottish soldier named Gregor MacGregor. He had come home from wars in South America and told everyone he had been made a prince of a rich new land there. He wore a uniform he had designed himself. He gave interviews to newspapers. He wrote a beautiful guidebook to Poyais, its climate, its people, its opportunities, and sold copies in the streets of London. British people believed him. They lined up to buy land in Poyais. They bought government bonds. They bought titles of nobility. They exchanged their British pounds for Poyais currency that MacGregor had printed himself. And then, worst of all, some of them decided to move there. 2 ships sailed for Poyais in the winter of 1822. Around 250 men, women, and children on board. Farmers looking for a better life. Craftsmen looking for work. Families who had sold everything to start again. They reached the coast of Central America. There was no port, no city, no farmland, no government. Only jungle, mosquitoes, and empty beach. Most of them died there, of fever, of hunger, of heartbreak. The few who survived were rescued months later and brought home. They told their story. It was in every newspaper. And MacGregor, the man who had invented a whole country and sent hundreds of people to die in it, was arrested, then released. He tried the same scam again a few years later. Then he moved to Venezuela and lived out his old age as a decorated general, buried with military honors. Most of his victims are buried in the jungle, in unmarked graves, in a country that never existed. 27 scandals. Some brought down presidents. Some killed millions. Some were buried so deep we are still finding the paperwork today. All of them were meant to stay hidden. The people who wrote most history books did not have the room for these. We do. Next time, 27 more. If you want to see what we dig up next, you know what to do.